Hello and welcome to the MHG podcast. As usual, life can be a little bit miserable, a little bit dark, so we're here to bring you as much joy and as much light as possible. Slightly different this week again, as unfortunately me and Stu can't get our schedules to marry up, so just recording separately. Stu's got his game or games that he'll talk about. I don't know what he's actually got this week. I've just got the one this week. Which is unusual because I've actually been playing a lot of racing games, but they are covered on the Indie Roundup, which you can find on the site. So for me, this week, it is City 20, which it's in early access, and it's basically an open world survival sandbox. So the way it goes is you're in a dystopian future, and stuff's gone on. And you basically need to survive. An apocalypse, I think it is, I suppose. The usual stuff that anyway that goes on. But what you've got here, this is a really interesting premise, is you're in a quarantine city. And it's not as giant as some other worlds you might actually find in games or anything. It's actually fairly contained as a whole. And you've got to do all your bits. You've got to venture out. You've got to find resources to survive. You need to meet other people, get talking to them, build relationships, work with different factions within the city, and things like that. But what's really interesting about this one is it does take a slow and methodical approach to everything. There's lots of conversations to be had, but the world seemingly, and this is something they talk about as a game feature, and I've noticed it does actually work, reacts realistically to the actions you take. So you might have factions that are not warring as such, but they might be at opposite ends of what they're trying to do within the world. And if you side with one or do things for them over another one, you can cause tension between them. And the relationships you build can have adverse or positive effects and knock-on effects with other people. So you've really got to consider the way you're interacting and things like that. And one of the early things that the game does, which I found really interesting, is someone tasks you with doing a couple of bits and you get free reign to sort of do what you want. You can smash up things for wood and so on, but it points out that maybe this thing that you want to smash up, you probably shouldn't because it belongs to someone else. You need to consider these sort of things as you're going. And the world is a permanent state as well, so it's limited in resources that you can find. So you're not going to go, I'll do this and then maybe come back and it's respawned or anything like that. Everything within the world is completely finite. So again, how you do things could have a knock-on effect. Overuse stuff early on and you could be left without further down the line. Leave it for too long, you never know, maybe someone else might take the bits. And what the game really does, it really encourages you to take your time with everything you do and get talking to people, build relationships. It's got all the usual themes in there. So obviously you've got your crafting, and your farming type stuff in there. There's some building stuff going on. And the game really encourages you to explore. And again, there's not a morality system as such, but you do get a choice of how you want to be. You could be completely open and honest with people and yourself and make sure you're doing everything by the letter of the quote-unquote law. Or you could go the other side, do things that would be considered illegal, steal some things, and deal with, again, the consequences of that. Now, it's a really interesting game. It's far from perfect. I think in places it looks ugly. But I get the look they're going for. It is, it's not meant to be a pretty world that you're in anyway. I find the movement maybe a bit too cumbersome at times. It almost needs just a slight bit more added pace and some options maybe to skip through some dialogue quicker. It's that's just a bit too slow at places. And it's not always easy to find where things are within the world. It's not highlighted well. No, that again, I get why that's a design choice, but it's kind of tough that you kind of like, you almost need maybe a vision cone, I feel, to go, right, well, let's have a look at stuff that's surrounding me, without having to walk over to this little bit and then walk over to this little bit. Just a couple of little quality of life things that could make this a really, really good game. But that being said, I've enjoyed my time with it so far. It is in early access, so it is still being worked on. But as things go, I think in the survival genre, it works really well. Yes, you've got to keep your food up, your drink up, your health and everything, which usually I don't like. This ticks down at a rate that is just about acceptable. It's not a case of, oh, you're walking for 5 minutes and you need more water. You're walking for another 5 minutes, you need more food. There's a decent amount of exploring and travelling you could do before you really need to think about getting that stuff in. Like, obviously, early game, you do need it. You need to do, because like, it gets you going, you wake up and, oh, you know, you're hungry, you're tired, you're thirsty, go and get yourself sorted, as it tries to introduce the mechanics to you. But as you go further, you can last longer. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting game. Whether it's worth picking up in early access for most people, I don't know. But it's definitely one that's worth keeping an eye on. There's a lot of positive things to say about the game. I've enjoyed my time with it. I'm going to put it away now and come back to it in a few months or weeks, depending on sort of like what updates there are. But yeah, as an early access game, again, we're looking at another one that's fairly feature complete. There's definitely more to be added, but there's a good solid concept for a game here. Recommended enough. With that, it's over to Stu.
So yeah, unfortunately recording separate this week just because of live stuff again. That generic little splash over live stuff that we cover things with. But yeah, busy. But yeah, we still got some good games to talk about and some interesting games to talk about. So from my good self, my first one is a game called G.I. Joe Wrath of Cobra. Now, this is a scrolling beat 'em up because obviously I haven't played enough of those this year. And yeah, it's in my wheelhouse, so, you know, can't complain. You'll remember that last week in episode 240, I played the Karate Kid Street Rumble, and that had some interesting ideas that some worked, some didn't. This is a much more, I would say, generously classic belt scroller than that game. It has a lot of the old tropes. You're just walking along hitting things as you'd expect. There's a couple of little changes here and there that kind of play into the way the game shakes out, let's say. And one of the big ones is you don't have a grab in this. You don't have a standard grab. You can grab downed enemies, but you don't have a standard one, which is a bit unusual for this kind of a game. I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of it, to be honest, because obviously when you're hitting the buttons repetitively, the grab thing of maneuvering your character so that you've got that clinch and you can do a real amount of damage feels quite impactful, I suppose is the right word, and I like that. And that being missing is a bit of a shame, because with these games the ultimate thing that you want is to feel like, you know, a bit of a badass, that they can only overwhelm you when there's tons of them, that one-on-one you're an absolute monster, that kind of a thing. And without that kind of painful crunching grab and the violence you mete out afterwards, it doesn't kind of grab it as much. And that sort of feeds into the sort of general way the game plays as well, to be honest, which is, it reminds me a lot of 80s and 90s, particularly 90s Konami belt scrollers. I know everyone goes on about The Simpsons, but I was never a really big fan, and for the same reason as I wasn't for most of them, which is that they're not very impactful. You don't really feel that your punches are landing, that it's not crunchy, it's not bone breaky. Along with having a really cool soundtrack, the likes of, you know, Final Fight and Streets of Rage 2 and that kind of thing, you've got to have that, but you've also got to have this feeling of, impact. It needs an entire army of goons to take you down. And with the Konami games, I never really got that. I make an exception for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, because that is a really good game. And I think the way that deals with grapple is really good and stuff. But, I mean, I digress. It's very much in the regular kind of X-Men, Simpsons, Turtles 1, Konami belt scroller. It feels a bit loose. There's not much in terms of diversity to the stages. They're just kind of a point A to point B kind of a thing. And if you look at Streets of Rage 4 recently, you've got lots of good objects, you've got lots of diversity, there's lots of different, things coming out of the background. There's even things like objects that can hit you, or, there's traversal stuff that gets in the way. And that make it a little bit different. Things coming out of the ground, spikes, fire, blah, 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 holes in the ground. It's got a couple of those things, but generally it's just pretty much an A to B kind of a thing. So all that's like fairly negative. So is there any positive? Well, I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, it looks quite nice. It's just sort of like the Karate Kid game. It's your standard sort of modern pixel art styled, retro throwback. It doesn't, see, I'm falling more onto criticisms again now, but it doesn't look as good as those ones from back in the day. And partly because I think that aesthetic doesn't necessarily suit G.I. Joe. I don't know. It really does the comic booky thing. So like all those games I mentioned from Konami, Turtles, Simpsons, X-Men, they're all comic book properties or comic book styled. And G.I. Joe should be, but it feels like it should be a little bit edgier. It's not cutesy. And these are kind of compressed sprites. They look quite cutesy. Anyway, I'm trying to say good things. It plays mechanically absolutely fine. It's got a special move that is quite good that you build at your bar, similar to what he did in Karate Kid, but with the difference that you don't lose it when you get hit. You've also got a block button, which is very, very necessary in this one. It really is, because there are tons of enemies. And I think that, when you get the flow going, it can be quite fun. But it's very, very basic. I mean, it kind of looks basic. It's visually all right, but nothing interesting. If it had come out of a clear blue sky with a retro throwback look, fair enough, you'd probably be a little bit impressed. But with every man and his dog picking that style now, and with companies doing it so beautifully, like in Shredder's Revenge, like in Streets of Rage 4, you've really got to do something different to stand out, and it doesn't really. So it's okay. My biggest complaint, I think, is I don't think that a scrolling beat-em-up is the right fit for G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe's all about two things. It's about funky gadgets and weapons. So each character had their own distinct weapon, which they don't have in this game. Well, now and again, but there's sometimes limited to their special move. But there's no sense that it's like based around. It's not a weapons combat based game. It's a punching game. So that's one of the things it misses. And the second thing is all the vehicles. Like, I remember that F-14 Tomcat that you could buy that was an absolute gigantic beast of a thing. And the hiss tank and the helicopters that you could get. And all of those vehicles were so cool as a kid. And you don't get to use any of those. And you do fight a couple occasionally, but it's just not really the focus. And I don't know, it just feels like you could put any character in that situation. It's not really utilising the property properly. Also, there's a lot of very generic kind of Cobra soldiers, and you do get to fight the odd unique character. But, I mean, there were dozens of these unique buggers back when I was a kid, and by now there must be, I don't know how many that they've written and created. And, I remembered even before I started playing it, and I've never been a big G.I. Joe head, but I remembered the likes of Storm Shadow, obviously, Destro, Cobra Commander, those twins, can't remember what they're called. There's all sorts of unique villains in there, and you're seeing one per level. It just doesn't seem to be a good fit. So, yeah, it's middling. It's one of those that I think if you're into the franchise, you might get more out of it than your regular punter, but I didn't get much from it myself. And as a beat 'em up, I've played a lot better even in the last 6 months. So it's quite mid, sorry to say. Maybe look for a sale on this one. It's not essential. If you're a G.I. Joe head, maybe go Joe. Well, let's step away from that now. But anyway, there you are. The next one I've been playing was a totally different beast to G.I. Joe. Is a game called Melobot, A Last Song. And this is a rhythm/melody based kind of explorathon adventure. Very much in a sort of Nintendo style mix between Zelda and Pikmin, I would say. It's very cute and sweet in the way that it's presented and charming, but it has quite a lot of depth in terms of the emotions that it brings out in you. And the basis of it is that you, as a robot, wake up, as it were, or become reactivated on a planet, and you discover that your world is in, well, the universe really is in peril, basically because of the way that humanity has over-mined and over-exploited plant resources for dark matter. There's a species of plant that's been discovered called a mallow fruit, I think, or a mallow plant, which contains dark matter, and it's been harvested, and this has destroyed the environment, and it's also destroyed humanity pretty much. And your creator is the last human alive, but he tasks you with rescuing these plants, and you rescue them by playing back to them the melodies that they produce, and when you do that, it frees them. Now, there's also some, in a very Horizon Zero Dawn kind of a way, there are guardian protectors of the environment that have ostensibly trying to do the right thing, protecting the plants, but actually they're just programmed to do it, and it's the wrong thing, and they need rescue. So what you do, you wander around the environment, and there's two types of gameplay. Well, three actually, because there's a nuance to it, but we'll get to that. But the main thing is that you go and you play tunes back, and you've got to get the tune, match the tunes correct to free and rescue the plants, and that there's about 30 of these per level, something like that. The other thing is that you have to fight the robots that are protecting them, and they tend to be boss fights. There's the odd normal encounter, but they tend to be boss fights, and it's this great big guardian robot that takes different forms, very much in the kind of Zelda style. Just if you have a look at any videos you'll see of this game, you'll see that, you know, it's got that influence very strongly. And you have button combos. You have a button to do damage, which does this wide area of effect damage, and a button to combo to heal yourself. And it works really, really well. That it's fun. The patterns of the bosses are nicely constructed. You have power-ups that you can, you know, gain better shields, better speed, that sort of thing, for moving around the environment and for dodging, all of that sort of stuff. And it all plays in well. Defeating the Guardians gives you a point that lets you increase your skills. But yeah, the meat of the game is playing the music back. And this is one of its really special points. You can choose easy mode or hard mode, but really they're different games in a way. The easy mode is not incredibly easy, but it's, you know, comparatively easy, and makes it a 4-hour sort of long experience. And it's like a rhythm action game. You press the buttons and the directional pad to play back the tunes in the right cadence, and, you know, match the tune and get it right, and then you save the plant. Hard mode, you don't have any button prompts. You have to listen to it by ear and then match that in time to the music using the buttons and the pad without any prompts, just by ear. So you're there kind of like pressing the button to find the right tune and then putting the tune together on the pad for yourself. It's very good. And that part of it's very reminiscent, obviously, of Ocarina of Time. in the concept rather than the execution. The execution's obviously a bit more sophisticated because you have to be on time, you have to hold the note for the duration, all of that kind of thing. It's not just a digital thing of quickly wrapping them in correctly and then you're done. And both of the modes are really, really excellent. And it's no, there's no massive depth. It's not hugely sophisticated, but it's nice. It's a pleasant play, and there's some real challenge in there sometimes, especially with obviously the tunes, but as I say, the Guardians as well keep you on your toes, and you're really impelled to do this. There's something about ecological rescue games that really drive you forward to want to do them, and this is really, really aided by the fact that the music in this is lovely. The tunes that are put forward, they're all kind of like broken up. There's a standard for the level, and that's broken up into different chunks or into little kind of remixes and really just snippets of an overall tune. And that approach with a kind of master tune and little snippets really gives you that kind of sense of building towards a proper song, and then you get to play bigger songs later. And yeah, very atmospheric, and it, as I say, it looks really nice. It's got a sort of semi-cel shaded look to it. It's very soft and rounded and colourful and very beautifully presented. Just before I go into what I thought overall, just to mention that it doesn't run very well. It runs on the Unity engine, and it runs just about okay on my big PC, chucking the grunt at it, but it runs very, very poorly on the Steam Deck. So yeah, I think it needs some optimization if possible, really, if the devs are listening. But you can get away by brute forcing it on a decent PC. I think it has a Switch release. I'm not sure how it runs on that, but I would be amazed if it didn't, if it managed to go over 30 frames a second. So if you're, feel a little bit dodgy with that like I do, then you might want to avoid it until, you can play it on a different platform, or you can get it where it's 60 FPS. But overall, it's a really lovely game. It's actually shouldered its way into one of my games of the year, I think. It's very, very sweet. It's tender. It's very touching. It's really sad. It's quite melancholy. It has messages of hope in there, but it has messages of sadness. It's got a very deliberate, considered way of thinking about the environment and makes you feel that way. And good music and mournful music or melancholy music really hits you in the feels like that. It really connects with people, and you having to play those tunes to help them, it just ties it all together into a very coherent emotional bundle, if you will. So it's very, very nice, very clever game. It's not, as I say, it's not very deep, and it's not very long, but it's very good. It's really, really good game. If you're into I wouldn't describe it as cozy gaming because it requires a little bit more effort than that implies. And also it's more emotional than most cozy games, and it will challenge you that way. But overall, it's a heartily recommended game. Very moving, nice mechanics, aesthetically very pleasing, and a bit emotionally challenging. I think you need that from time to time, but fair warning, it will make you sad. Okay, well that's it for this week. So as usual, make sure you follow all of our content. Look on the website, plenty of updates coming through all the time. Check out our content on YouTube. There should be a video up there of me completing the final stage on Astrobot soon, I believe, as long as Brad's got his finger out. And also, obviously, join us on Discord if you want to chat. But until next week, stay safe and stay sane.